If you're in the market for a drone, then DJI is a name you've probably heard of. One of their most known drones is the DJI MINI 3 Pro, and whether you're an inexperienced or experienced remote pilot, this is one to certainly take a look at. I've been flying this thing since it was released, which means I've spent more than enough time with it to give it a solid opinion on how it feels to own and fly this drone, so that is what we're going to talk about today. The first thing I have to do is give DJI their kudos on their design choices. The plastic build here doesn't necessarily scream premium if you judge it by the look and feel, but I've actually crashed the first Mini 3 Pro I had, and it survived with only a few scuff marks. I was actually able to still fly it from that point on, and the only issue I had was a broken prop. Now, you might have noticed that I said first Mini 3 Pro, and that is because the one you're seeing here is a replacement. Like I said before, as far as I was concerned, that unit would have flown, but I made a mistake from before that compelled me to get it replaced. And that mistake was that I stripped the screw on one of the props here, and this is actually something that really isn't that hard to do with the screwdriver you get in the packaging. So if there is one thing about this design I'd have to say I dislike, it's the maintenance of these propellers. So this is something you want to be very, very careful with, especially if you didn't purchase DJI Care. Now, of course, I did try to take it to an authorized repair shop, but there was no luck extracting the screw. So again, just be extremely careful when you are taking these props off and replacing them, because this screwdriver will and can strip your screw, and you'll be basically stuck with a drone that you better hope you don't break a prop with. Another thing I can say about the design is the fact that there aren't any front arms like with some of DJI's other drones. It's a small detail, but it does allow you to get the drone operational a tiny bit faster, since you don't have to do the guesswork about which arm to pull out first. I originally purchased the Mini 3 Pro with this DJI RC controller, and honestly, I don't regret my choice. You can fly the Mini 3 Pro with one of three controllers: the RC N1, the RC that I have here, and the RC Pro, which will cost you an arm, a leg, and a sole, and your first child. I own and have used the RC N1 before, so I know what to expect with that controller, but I'd have to say hands down that the RC here is for sure the choice that you should consider. It really does strike somewhat of a perfect balance between the two other controllers for a couple of reasons. Since you definitely don't have to worry about using your phone to fly and getting interrupted while you are doing that, nor do you have to worry about the large price tag that comes with the RC Pro, or worry about losing your first child if you don't buy the RC Pro. Other reasons to consider this controller is that it's built on the Android platform, which allows you to do things like transfer files on the controller directly to another device without even going through the official process. It really does bring a familiarity to those who already use Android, and it does have support for micro SD cards. The display is also bright enough to use it outdoors on the brightest of days, and the best part is that you won't have to deal with phone calls and text messages coming through while you are flying. Really, hands down, this is a no-brainer. If you want the ultimate convenience of being able to fly without any interruptions, and if you don't want to spend more on the controller than you did on your drone, then the DJI RC is the RC for you. Now, of course, in saying all of this, this controller isn't without its issues. And my biggest and most bothersome one is the fact that you don't have access to the full Android system here, which means you can't download other apps. You also can't connect this controller to an external display, which really isn't that big of a deal, but it's still something that would have been nice to actually have here. If you do want any of those features, then you'll have to purchase that RC Pro, but again, that controller costs more than the Mini 3 Pro, and I feel that it's an investment that one would have to make only if they plan to fly long-term or for another purpose. Now, depending on who you speak to about this controller, you'll probably get one of two responses or even questions pertaining to the range. If you are one of those people looking to go the distance with your drone, then I can tell you I have not had any significant signal issues at all. I also don't have any need or desire to fly my drone beyond visual line of sight, so I guess this is something I can't really speak to anyway. And I'm not sitting here trying to discredit anybody who has had signal issues with this controller, but I'd be interested to see what environments people are flying in and the reason as to why you would want to fly that far in the first place and beyond visual line of sight anyway. Last thing I can say about this controller is that the battery life does last pretty darn long. DJI states that you can get about 4 hours of battery life out of this controller, and I've actually never had this controller die on me, and I believe that the lowest I've gone is about 2 out of the 4 battery indicators here. I do fly for a pretty long time whenever I do fly, because I'm usually trying to line up a shot or trying to sort of experiment with certain ideas, so I'll usually do multiple shots in the same place, and this controller's battery has just kind of held up through all of that. And by all that, I mean my flights being no less than about 30 to an hour. The quality of the camera and gimbal on the Mini 3 Pro is downright superb for such a small drone. This is one of those UASs that you can take anywhere, put in mostly any situation, and get footage that you'll be pleased with every single time. As a matter of fact, I've actually just done a recent video where I mixed footage from both my Mini 3 Pro and Mavic 3, and although I can't say that I am a professional photographer that can pick out the nuances between that footage, I can say that most people would not be able to tell the difference in certain cases unless they were professional photographers, I guess. You've also got the ability to do 48 megapixel stills, and although this is something I've only used about twice, it's not that I don't appreciate this feature, it's just that I feel that the 12 megapixel photos this drone takes are more than adequate for the majority of whatever I'm taking a photo of. If you don't really care about the camera specs though, then one other thing that might interest you is the gimbal range on this drone. In addition to the 90 degrees of controllable range you get when facing the camera down, you get to control the gimbal upwards to a maximum of 59 degrees. This may not seem all that important, but it does allow you to get some pretty interesting videos without having to move the drone upward into a particular position. One example of this is rising up into a canopy of trees without having to take your Mini 3 Pro to a certain height above those trees, or level with those trees. You get what I'm trying to say. Hyperlapses are also something I enjoy seeing very much, and I'm glad that they were added for the first time on one of DJI's mini drones. I just enjoyed being able to set the drone up to let it do its thing and come up with something that's pretty cool to watch. You do have the vertical shooting capability. I personally don't have too much use for vertical photos unless I'm trying to make a wallpaper or something. But honestly, I kind of forget that the Mini 3 Pro can actually do vertical photos. And, you know, it's not that I haven't needed to do those at some point, it's just that I literally forget that the feature's there. The video capabilities of this drone are very well rounded. Though you can only go up to 4K, you do have features like dual native ISO to make sure that you can pull out all of the details from the shadows, or at least all the details this drone can get. You also do have the ability to do 4K at 60 frames per second, which is good if you'd like to slow things down. And the only downside to this is that you can't film in 60 FPS and have the dual native ISO feature working at the same time. You're pretty much limited to 30 frames per second if you want to make sure that you can eke out as much detail out of whatever it is you're shooting, especially when there's harsh light and shadows. A big reason to consider buying the Mini 3 Pro is to have the extra smart features that come with it versus the other two drones in the Mini line. Smart features such as focus track are a big reason to look into purchasing this drone, and focus track can be used in 3 different ways. I won't go into too much detail about them since that would kind of be its own video, but just take the name focus track literally. The Mini 3 Pro can be used to actively and autonomously track you, your car, and an inanimate object, and it does this pretty well, but not perfectly. Generally speaking, when you have a clear line of sight between you and the camera, things work out very well, and you can end up having the drone follow you for as long as the battery lasts. Other times the drone will lose focus, especially if you are passing in front of another object and it is tracking you. Luckily, I haven't had this happen too much, but it can be pretty annoying when it does happen, since you'd expect it to be able to kind of pick you up and retrack you once the obstruction is gone. You also do need to have an adequate amount of light in order for tracking to work, and if the ambient light is too low, it just won't work, but this is most likely the same for any drone that can do this, and it does make sense. It is also worth noting that you cannot use the focus track set of features while you are doing 4K 60 frame per second videos, and you can't use it to track animals, which actually makes perfect sense since you don't want to scare animals, of course. When it comes to the kind of automated shots the Mini 3 Pro can take, one thing you do get over the Mini 2 and Mini 3 is the ability to do master shots, which allow the drone to fly autonomously and get shots that it thinks would be good based on your scene. I can't say that I've used this feature much or see the big deal with it since you do have the quick shots anyway, but if you ever need some inspiration for some kind of idea of what to do, this might be a good feature for someone that's a beginner, since the drone will do everything, and in the future you can see what it has done and create shots based off of what you get from the master shots feature. The obstacle avoidance sensors on the Mini 3 Pro are another big reason to consider this UAS. You don't get the full 360-degree sensing here, but the front and back sensors actually do a good job of seeing certain things and trying to calculate ways around them. I was even surprised that it was able to notice thin objects like a slim tree branch. And they also make for a really helpful way to avoid things when there are heavy winds that the Mini 3 Pro has to contend with. The lack of a side sensor can be cause for concern though, since it would be pretty easy to crash your drone either by yourself or while flying in certain modes like focus track, which I talked about before. I did want to take some time to talk about a common misconception with obstacle avoidance sensors. Some think that having them makes the drone impervious to being crashed with normal operation, and this is mostly true, but you should understand that those sensors do have an effective sensing range, speed, and field of view. I think that the speed is arguably the most important thing here, because what this means for you is that your drone is going to take a certain amount of time to analyze an object as an obstacle and adjust the movement accordingly. The only reason I'm talking about this is because if you happen to manipulate the gain and expo settings in your drone to make them faster within a certain mode, then the obstacle avoidance sensors could potentially not have enough time they need to make the decisions they need to. Just something I wanted to throw out there though. It seems like I keep adding stuff as to why you should consider the Mini 3 Pro, but another big reason is that the 1080p 30 FPS transmission feed you get with the addition of OcuSync 3 is something that I'm really enjoying. My first DJI drone was the Mini 2, and as a reminder, the transmission feed for that drone was maxed out at 720p 30 frames per second with OcuSync 2. Now, what matters here is the resolution of the feed. If you're flying in an open area, then this probably won't be as big a deal to you, but it's when you're flying in an area like a forest or somewhere else that has more intricate objects that this actually has saved me a couple of times. With the quality of this feed, I was actually able to see certain objects that were pretty thin much more clearly, which allowed me to plan my route around those things better. As I said before, my first drone was the Mini 2, and one of the most annoying things, at least for me, about that drone was how slow it was to acquire GPS satellites. The Mini 3 Pro takes about 2 to 5 seconds to acquire GPS signals, and this does make it so that you can get flying much faster. I will admit this is kind of a first world issue and not something that may be important to everybody, but for those who have less patience, not unlike myself in certain situations, this can be the difference between, having to wait that extra few seconds and getting your drone off the ground. Of course, you can fly it without GPS. However, you will reach the limit that it can fly without GPS, and it's just really nice to have it acquire those signals really fast. Wind resistance is always an important factor when looking into a drone, and I can say that the Mini 3 Pro can handle a decent amount of wind. However, you do want to be careful in very high winds, and I'd say anything over 27 or maybe 30. Luckily, I haven't had an accident caused by wind, but I have had this drone flying in pretty high winds, and it has held its own for the most part, but got pushed around a lot. I already talked about the obstacle sensors before, but this is one reason you'll want them if you are flying in heavy winds and the drone gets pushed around. it can be the difference between it hitting an object versus seeing it and helping you get out of the way once it does see it. Battery life is a hard spec to give a straightforward answer on. I could literally lie to you all and tell you you'll get a certain amount of battery life, but there are so many factors that contribute to getting the best battery life you can, especially when it comes to a drone. Luckily, you do have two choices when it comes to the batteries for the Mini 3 Pro and the Mini 3 series in general, which literally consists of one other drone anyway. You can stick with the standard battery that keeps your drone under the weight limit at 249 grams, or you do have the ability to choose the extended battery, which will put your drone over the weight limit and make it so that you do have to register it, but you will get increased battery life. Now, I don't believe it would do you all any good, like I said, if I just told you you can fly for a certain amount of time. But what I can share with you is one experience I had and two tests that I did. So the experience involves me using the extended battery, which I fly with 99% of the time. I was filming some clips for the obstacle avoidance portion of this video, and this actually consisted of me taking multiple short flights that all added up to 6 minutes. Now, to be fair, I did power the drone off and on between each flight and pretty much ended up with 75% of the battery life left from 100. One huge factor that contributed to this, besides the constant power on and off, is the fact that it was 93 degrees outside. Now, like I also mentioned, I did decide to do 2 battery tests, and before I go into the results, let me just say that for both tests, I flew around aimlessly, just recording 4K 30 FPS footage. The first test was using the standard battery and lasted for about 12 minutes and 23 seconds. Some important things to know is that the battery life was at 94% when I started, the temperature was at 61 degrees, and I flew at a max altitude of 393 feet, although it wasn't sustained, but this was the max allowed in that area. By the end of this test, I was left with 45% of the battery life left from when I started. For the second test, I used the extended battery, which was at 100%. I did put the drone up in the air until the battery drained to about 94% so I could try and emulate the first test. And from that point on, my flight lasted for about 13 minutes and 30 seconds. At this point, the temperature had risen by 1 degree to go to 62 degrees. And again, I flew at a maximum height allowed of 394 feet here. This time it was a little bit more sustained, although I did have to drop down a few times because of some birds. After I was done with this test, I was left with 57% of the battery life from when I started. Now, it is also worth noting that I do live at a higher altitude than most will, as you might have seen from some of the screen recordings I've shared here. But really, what I'm trying to do is give you an idea of what's possible within a specific environment like the one I live in, since there are many factors that can impact the performance of an aircraft. Now, like I said, I can't give you a solid number, but I'm kind of thinking of worse conditions. Like if you lived in Arizona, the wind was blowing at like 70 miles per hour and you were in 111 degree weather, could you get 20 minutes on even the standard battery? Yeah, most likely. Depends on what you're doing, of course, because the more you move the aircraft is the more the air flows through it and keeps it cool. But yeah, like I said, this is just supposed to be an idea. So the last thing I wanted to do today is show you all just how loud the Mini 3 Pro can be, which really isn't all that loud when you consider that there are bigger drones that are much louder. So I'm going to get this thing up into the air. I'm going to record the decibels it gets to, or whatever, however you say that anyway, you know what I mean. And yeah, you'll get to see exactly how loud this sounds and how embarrassed you will be in public the first time you do this, and then it'll get much easier. Okay, so right now the drone is really close to me. It's actually 3.1 feet away from the controller, and as you can see, it's not that loud. I mean, 77 decibels is the highest I've recorded here. So it's not bad when you consider, like I said, there are bigger drones that do sound louder. But let's go ahead and see just how far you need to get it in order for it not to I guess, to go ahead and make a sound. So I'm gonna take this straight up. And there it is. And I can still hear it, but right now it is about 132 feet above me. And really, like I said, you can still hear it while it's up above you like this. However, if you are flying around some people, then this may not bother them as much, or if you are flying over them at this height, then they probably won't even know where the heck the drone is. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring it back down, and then I'm gonna get it a distance away from me, and let's see how far we need it to go before we stop hearing it. Actually, you know what? It's at 30.5 feet right now. Let's keep it this way because I can clear some trees. And let's just go forward and see how loud. Okay, so right now it's about 386 or 387 feet away from me. And I can still hear it because, you know, that tone that it makes is pretty significant. But most people are not going to be able to hear this, especially if you took off from where I'm standing, or if you took off essentially from, you know, where you're standing. People are not going to be able to hear this. And as you can see, this beautiful mountain range in the same place I've literally been filming for like most of this video is right here. And you're probably going to be filming this. So yeah, the anxiety factor that you feel normally when you first fly a drone, it's going to be there. And then when you have a drone like this, you'll kind of get to learn how it sounds and you'll be all right, basically. To end this video, I thought I would display this video I took yesterday in the evening, just to give you an idea of what some of the details you can catch in a video with the Mini 3 Pro are and the dynamic range. But with that being said, of course, overall, I think that the Mini 3 Pro is a drone for every and anybody. The overall feature set you get with the camera, obstacle avoidance, hyperlapses, and other things makes this a very well-rounded drone for beginners, all the way to those that have been flying drones for a long time. This is the drone you can easily take with you and not have to give much thought about in terms of how much space it's going to take up in a bag or elsewhere. It's also the one that you can take with you around the world, since it falls under that 249 gram limit, which some countries outside of the US have. The price for what you get really isn't bad when you consider that this is a flying camera and will give you perspectives others might not have with their smartphones or DSLRs. Of course, it does have its limitations in regards to the wind resistance, the lack of side sensors, and the camera sensor size if you're trying to capture all of the details you can. But these are things you'll most likely worry about further down the line if you're a beginner or an intermediate pilot. If you're an advanced or professional pilot, you'll understand these limitations and create a workflow around those limitations. All that being said, I do thank you for watching this video, and if it was valuable to you, I'd appreciate if you would do the things that a normal YouTuber would ask you to do. And if you are considering purchasing a Mini 3 Pro, I'd appreciate if you consider doing so from one of the affiliate links in the description, as they do help this channel out for sure. As always, wherever you are in the world though, have a great morning, a great afternoon, a great evening, or a great night, and I will see you in the next video. And again, thank you for watching.